So a few years ago, my boyfriend's dad's family decided to get together and all chip in to rent a condo in Ontario and get together. There was a big extended family over there that his dad never saw because he only really got along with one of his 3 sisters. My boyfriend's mom had talked him into going though, and they let me tag along because I'd been around long enough that they liked me and trusted me. I can't remember where everyone else had gone. I think it was the beach for what was possibly like the 3rd time that day. It was just me and my boyfriend at the condo, because we were kind of sick of the beach and just wanted to do nothing in the shade for a while. We were sitting outside, looking over the water and just kind of talking about life. I had just finished reading the Harry Potter series, so we were just kind of talking about that for a bit when this woman comes out of the brush beside the condo. Just for an idea, this condo was about an acre of land, maybe. It was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. The front of the condo was probably 70 feet from a dirt road no one traveled down really, and there were some dense trees and brush and whatnot that surrounded 3 sides of it. This woman comes out of the wooded area and I immediately knew something wasn't right. She was limping and she only had on 1 sandal and frankly looked terrible. She was pale and her face was gaunt. She was really, really pretty, but she just looked exhausted. The thing that immediately caught my attention was her baby, who she was holding pretty tightly in her arms as she started to come towards us. I didn't really know what to do, but my boyfriend immediately got up and walked over to make sure she was okay. I couldn't help but think of all the awful things that might have happened. After spending so many hours hearing these horror stories on Reddit, I was just terrified she'd do something. My boy is a lot more trusting than I am, though, and he's always had the first instinct of, what's the problem and how can I help? He's never assumed the bad in anybody. So this woman is just sobbing by the time she gets to the porch of the condo, and she looks like she's just been through a war zone. She's shaking and hyperventilating and crying, and she's telling us that basically her boyfriend had been drunk for a while and he's been getting worse and worse, and he's been an overall abusive guy. He'd get angry whenever she was focusing on the baby instead of him, and part of what made him mad was that it wasn't his kid, so he kind of didn't care about the baby at all. She told us how this time in particular he was drunk and she was driving home. With the baby in the back seat, he grabbed the baby's booster seat and tore it out of the car and threw it out the window while they were driving. She got the baby out of the seat or something. I don't remember how, because as she's telling us about how he started hitting her before she took the baby and ran, we hear this yelling, and we turn and see this angry dude walking up to the condo, and she starts losing it. Drunk and angry, this guy followed her to our condo and was starting to come up to us. He was trying to act like he wasn't mad. He was doing an, "Oh, you guys found her, thank you so much, maybe let's go home," kind of thing, but he was slurring his speech and not doing a good job of hiding how mad he was. My boy has always been a pacifist. Honestly, he's even kind of a pushover. He's really non-confrontational and tries to find a way to talk stuff out and come to an agreement before doing anything, but before I could even say anything, he's across the yard and approaching this guy. As much of a pacifist as he is, he's also huge. He's built like a football player. He's 6'3", and at the time, he was 230 pounds. I've known my boy since we were 10. At the time, we were 20, and we've been dating for just over a year. I knew him better than anyone. He's never done anything like this before, and he goes up to this guy and goes, "Not another step, dude." And he's shaking as he says it. The guy tries to walk around my boy and goes, No, it's okay, I'm just here to take her home." And he steps in front of him and shakes his head. "You're drunk," he said. "So I'm going to pretend like maybe you didn't get what I just said. Don't come any closer." It's at this point the guy stops trying to pretend and he says something like, "You don't know what's going on. That's my girlfriend and I'm going to take her home." And he tries rounding my boyfriend again, and one more time my boyfriend blocks him and goes, "Stop." I've never heard this tone in his voice before or since. It was scary. It wasn't him. This guy tried one more time before my boy finally put his hand on his chest and pushed him back a bit, keeping his hand on the guy's chest. I'm telling you right now, you're not going anywhere near that girl and her child, so turn around and walk away. This guy was about 5'6", maybe 5'7", so when he looked up to threaten my boyfriend, he had looked like a kid. The guy finally looks up at my boyfriend and he says something that I couldn't hear. My boyfriend said something back, and then the guy stared at him for a moment, like he was deciding whether or not to do anything. My boyfriend finally pushed him away, and the guy stumbled back, and then started pointing at me and the girl as he was saying something, and then started to walk away. I didn't learn till the next day, but the guy had told my boyfriend that he had a gun, and that he was coming back, and that he'd kill him and I if we stopped him again. My boyfriend's response to this changed depending on who's telling the story. Origin told me that he told the guy he'd feed him his own teeth, which made me laugh because he's such a dork and he got that from a movie, and ever since then the line he tells everyone else is, "I'll be waiting." The woman was sobbing. The baby was sobbing, and I was shaking because even though he didn't throw any punches or anything, I could tell that he was ready to hurt this guy if anything else had happened. We called the police and didn't really do much of anything outside of make sure everyone was breathing and take the girl to her sister's place. We didn't really hear much from her after, but I know my boyfriend sent her an email once or twice, and she's married now to someone else and had another kid last time they talked. It was a really nice trip, despite that part and a fight my boyfriend's dad got into with someone in his family, but I had P-mail for the first time, and it wasn't too bad. In December 2013, during my sophomore year of college, my at-the-time boyfriend David had a fraternity dinner banquet that I attended with him. It was a nice event, requiring everyone to dress up. He was in a suit, I was in a dress and heels. This is important for later. We had a good time and then went back to his place to drop off the award David had won and changed into tacky Christmas sweaters for a party we had later that night. It was maybe 7:30 p.m., but given that it was December, it was already dark out when we pulled into the parking lot outside David's apartment. At his place, there was one road with parking on either side, spots against the building and spots against a fence that lined the edge of the complex property. We parked in a fenced spot with the trunk of our car facing the building, directly across from the stairs leading up to David's door, maybe 30 feet from safety. David and I got out and went to the trunk to get his award when a man started to approach us. David noticed him and said, "Hey, what's up, man?" The man said nothing and kept walking towards us. As he got closer, I could see that he was wearing baggy black sweatpants and a camo hoodie. He had the hood on and the drawstrings were pulled tight, so I could only see about half his face. Both his hands were in the front hoodie pocket. David said again, "What's up?" This time the man answered, "Get up against the car." Confused, I said, "Wait, what?" The man pulled a gun out of his hoodie pocket. "I said get up against the car." David got against the back of the car while the man put the gun against his back. I was in utter shock that this was happening, so I took a step back, now trapped between two cars, a fence, and a man holding a gun to my boyfriend. He told David to give him all the money he had. We both really only used cards and never had cash on us. Unfortunately, though, while home for Thanksgiving, his parents had given him $200 in 20s, all of which went into the hands of our mugger. Then he turned to me, pointed the gun at my face, less than a foot away, and said, "Your turn." I was dressed up and only carrying a small clutch purse. I literally only had a phone and lip gloss on me. I stammered out that I didn't have anything while staring at the gun he pointed at me. He then went back to my boyfriend. At this point, I felt my blood starting to boil. I was becoming less frightened and more angry, outraged that this man was aggressively stealing from two broke college kids. How dare he treat other people like this, I thought. Couldn't he tell that we were coming from an event and he was going to ruin our night? I wanted to kick him with my big clunky heel so badly, but thankfully I realized that probably would only make him mad. I grabbed my phone, keeping my hand in my purse, and tried to dial 911. Unfortunately, my purse was too small to hide any movement, and I was worried if he saw me trying to call for help, he'd shoot. So I just stood there, staring at the gun being pressed into David's back. Finally, he took David's wallet and car keys and threw them in one direction, ran off in the other, hopping the fence, separating the apartment complex from a small neighborhood. David and I stood in silence for a second, trying to grasp what just happened. We slowly gathered his keys and wallet, then went inside and called the police, definitely in shock. This is where the story gets really interesting. The police had an officer patrolling the other side of the apartment complex. It was a group of 26 buildings. We were in 26. The cop was over near 1, because they had gotten a call the previous day about the same guy mugging someone over there. Police and detectives come over and took our story and asked us questions for about an hour. When they left, it was still relatively early, maybe 9 p.m. We were still shaken up, but David and I decided we'd still go to the tacky Christmas party we had planned on attending, thinking it would help us take our mind off this horrible encounter. Our friend was hosting a pregame at his apartment in Building 3 of the same complex. Even though we decided not to drink that night, we headed over after getting into our tacky sweaters. The pregame got a little rowdy, and we heard a knock on the door. We opened it to see the person who lives next door to our friend. He said, "Hey guys, you might want to keep it down. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. I have police and investigators at my apartment right now because I was mugged out here last night. I heard 2 more people got mugged tonight, so just please be safe." David and I look at each other, then back at him. "Oh, hi. That's us. We're the 2 people that were mugged tonight. Nice to meet you, fellow mugging victim." He laughed and shook our hands. Neighbor and David compared knives that they were now carrying as personal defense weapons before he went back to his place. Later on down the road, David and I had broken up, but the security at the complex was amped up. More lights were installed in the parking lot, and my girlfriend and I moved in. We had to park in the same set of spots where I was held at gunpoint. Probably a stupid way to face your fears, but we didn't have any issues while we lived there, thankfully. When I was much younger and far less concerned with consequences, I was introduced to a guy through a mutual friend that was well connected. It took me forever to figure out how this guy could stock a veritable roving pharmacy in his vehicle, but at the time I wasn't so much concerned with how, just the when. Like, hey man, when can I purchase an irresponsible amount of diverted prescription medications from you? As I got to know him more, I learned more about a purveyor of happy pills, and he thoroughly threw off a bad vibe. I would do my absolute best to avoid the post-deal hangout, but the guy was clearly and completely socially maladroit. Eventually, Dealer, I'll henceforth refer to him as D, starts attempting to insinuate himself into my group of friends more and more. He would call me constantly, text me like an abandoned Tinder date, and generally harass me to hang out. We would casually drink beer in the backyard of my house, and he'd happen to be in the neighborhood, just like he'd accidentally take a load off and decide to stick around. I am not a complete jerk, so it was difficult to sell someone a clue who doesn't have a proverbial nickel to his name. I specifically remember a night when each of us were recounting macho stories of tussles and scrapes we'd been in, and Dee decided it was his turn to contribute. It went something like this. "Oh, that's nothing, man. One time I shot a man in the face with a sawed-off shotgun and beat the rap on a self-defense technicality." We all sort of went slack-jawed at this moment and nodded our heads, mumbling uncomfortably. Wow, pretty cool. At that point, I think we all just assumed he was a one-upper and would say whatever to reinforce the tough guy persona he was so desperate to have us believe. I should have realized then that maybe D wasn't exactly an asset to the societal fabric. But, I didn't want to hurt the guy's feelings. Plus, drugs. A few weeks later into the summer, and some of the boys and I decide to tie one on and head downtown to the clubs. Now, I know for a fact that I hadn't committed the felonious sin of imparting knowledge of our physical location to D, but somehow he materialized by my side as I was ordering a drink. Even in my own, greatly impaired state, I could tell D was in a knee-walking, gutter-sucking blackout. It took me all of 30 seconds of surveying his slack expression coupled with those glassy black eyes doing the 1,000-yard stare to surmise that D was not going to be a fun man to be around on this night. My hypothesis soon proved all too accurate when he began pushing random people on the dance floor, accosting women in front of their respective boyfriends and husbands, all the while fiddling around in his pockets for something. Starting to get why D wasn't a pillar of social proficiency? Eventually he was ejected from the club, and, as a mission of pure mercy, I went outside to make sure he at least found a cab home. And that's when I discovered what D was looking for in his pocket all night. As I walked outside, I could see several bouncers warily surrounding this portly whirling dervish of an idiot as he's brandishing a freaking 6-foot serrated fold-out knife at them. I still have no idea what possessed me to step in and corral him, and I still believe that's the only reason I wasn't cut to absolute ribbons is because of the Gumby-like flexibility I'm afforded under the influence of alcohol and prescription medications. I was finally able to convince him into a taxi and send him packing. At this point, I made a firm decision to stop doing drugs and, by proxy, stop seeing D. Ever. I blocked his number and refused to go out. It's lucky that I did because some months later, he found himself once again in a scuffle at that very same establishment. Only this time I wasn't there to rescue him. He stabbed a man 7 or 8 times and hot-footed it into an alley in some pitiful attempt at an escape. The police didn't have to do much sleuthing, as there were plenty of bystanders willing to point out his location. D is now in a level 4 prison and isn't eligible for parole for another decade or so. And I say good. D, let's not freaking meet again. I can't remember exactly when this happened, but I think it was March 2019 when I was 17. I quite often get the train into London to visit my boyfriend. I go up on Friday and Saturday and come back Sunday evening. My parents always told me, quite rightly, to try and get an early train home on Sunday in order to avoid traveling late by myself, but me being naive and stupid always accidentally missed the earlier trains in order to spend more time with my boyfriend. This particular Sunday, I was getting a train that got into the station where I lived at around 9 p.m. My station is the last stop on the line, and where the train terminates, so by the end of the journey it is always relatively empty. Sometimes I'm the only one getting off aside from the guard. Usually I would just put my noise-canceling headphones on, settle down and zone out whatever was happening around me. I'm quite an anxious traveler, so blocking out the sound helps me relax. I also try and sit at the end of the carriage where there aren't as many people, as having a lot of people around can make me more susceptible to anxiety attacks. After this evening, I always made sure to sit near people. I'm sitting with my headphones on, tucked away with my suitcase in the footwell of the seat next to me, in a pair of seats next to a window, sitting in the window seat, when I notice a man stumble into the seats adjacent to mine across the aisle. He leans across the seats, looking directly at me, and mumbles something to me. He was wearing all black, a massive black coat, and had a big duffel bag. I, a little anxious because I'm not the biggest fan of talking to strangers, take off my headphones and politely ask him to repeat himself. His speech is slurred, making what he is saying completely incoherent, but after he's repeating himself several times, I realize he's asking if I know if there are any taxi companies at my station. I say no sorry and put my headphones back on. He leans over again and asks me the same question. I take my headphones off and give him the same reply. No, I don't know of any, sorry. He says something else. I ask him to repeat himself because his speech is so slurred I don't know what he's saying. This strange conversation goes on for about 20 minutes. I can't understand much of what he is saying. He's sort of half mumbling, half speaking, and he's not really making much sense. He keeps asking me how I'm getting home and where I live. I just say by car and don't say anything else about where I live. I'm super nervous now because this guy just gave me the creeps. I had a feeling something bad was going to happen, and he is starting to make me uncomfortable. There was just this vibe about him that he was bad news. He then asked me if I'm going to call the police on him. I say no, and he starts mumbling and swearing profusely. He mumbles something about beating my brains in. I'm really starting to freak out now. All of a sudden, he moves across the aisle to sit in the seat next to mine, trapping me in my seat. I cannot escape. I'm sitting next to the window and he's completely blocking the aisle. I'd have to awkwardly climb over to him to leave. I've decided he must be high or drunk because his eyes look absolutely crazy and his speech is so slurred. He tells me I'm very beautiful and asks if I have a boyfriend, moving closer until I could feel his breath on my face. I look around to see if there is anyone in the carriage with me, but I can't see anyone. He leans in really close, and I'm freaking out now. But luckily the train guard comes through from the next carriage, sees me looking very scared, and comes over to ask if everything is okay. Immediately, this guy's demeanor changes. He leans away from me, and he waves his hand as if to say nothing is wrong. I say yes, everything is okay, but by the look on my face, the guard can tell I'm super uncomfortable. The guard makes small talk with the guy and then moves to stand by the door behind us. I don't know what to do. Even though the guard is behind me, I feel really unsafe and know I have to get away from this man. I ask the guy if he would move back to his seat and say I don't want to talk to him as he's making me uncomfortable. He moves back and starts muttering and swearing again, mumbling half-formed threats under his breath. I call my dad, who's picking me up, and when he answers the phone, I immediately say, "Hey, Dad." The guy looks at me and says, I'm sorry, I didn't know you had a dad." He tries to talk to me whilst I'm on the phone. He's talking over me the whole time, but I can't actually make out what he's saying. I have no idea how to try and communicate to my dad that I'm not feeling safe, and this weirdo is talking to me without him overhearing. The train is pulling into the final stop, so I pull my suitcase out of the footwell to try and make a quick exit from the train. The guy gets up really quickly and goes in front of me, and then grabs my suitcase to take it off the train and steal it, presumably. I still had my hand on it and managed to pull it out of his hands. He gets off the train quickly, and I stand next to the guard for a couple of minutes because I didn't want to get off the train at the same time as this guy. The guard asked me if I'm okay, and I burst into tears. I'm already anxious and tired, and this may seem like something insignificant, but I suffer with really bad anxiety, and it really creeped me out. A lady comes over. I don't know how she knew I was crying about what had just happened with this guy. She must have seen him getting off the train. She says he was asking her about taxis and making her feel uncomfortable until she told him to ask someone else. She apologizes for sending him my way. They both offer to walk me to my car. Luckily, my dad is sitting in the parking lot, and I get in the car safe and sound. There's no sign of where the guy on the train went. And I wish the story stopped here. We make a stop at a small supermarket on the way home, and usually my dad would send me to get whatever we needed, but because I'm still feeling upset from the train, I sit in the car in the deserted parking lot. As soon as my dad enters the supermarket, a car pulls up on the other side of the lot. I see the same guy from the train in the passenger seat, and my blood runs cold. The car he's in isn't a taxi either, which I found strange as that's what he originally was asking me about. I sink down into the seat a bit, hoping he doesn't see me, but it's like he already knows I'm in the car. He starts pointing at me and talking to the driver. They get out of the car and start walking through the lot towards my car. I immediately lock the doors. My phone is in my bag, which is in the boot, so all I can do is sit there and pray my dad is going to come back at any moment. They've nearly made it to the car when my dad gets back. He was only going in for bread. They see him and start walking immediately in the other direction towards the supermarket. I yell at my dad to get in the car. I'm crying so hard, and by the time my dad has gotten to the driver's seat, the men are nowhere to be seen. I managed to calm down enough to tell my dad between sobs about how the guy from the train was in the parking lot in a car with someone, and that they were walking towards me. I point at the car they were in, and my dad doesn't say much and just starts driving home. When we got home, and my mom has managed to calm me down a bit. My dad tells me he noticed the same car driving behind us when we left the station, meaning they must have followed us from the station to the supermarket. I felt really embarrassed, like I was overreacting and making a fuss over nothing because I'm just oversensitive with bad anxiety. When the guy started talking to me on the train, I felt physically sick and just had this overwhelming feeling something bad was going to happen. Even though I have anxiety, I usually don't get these feelings just from talking to a stranger. This happened a little before my 20th birthday, so about 4 to 5 months ago. It was about 5 p.m. and I was waiting for a friend at a bar and he was running a little late. So I went ahead and got my first drink while waiting. As I was sitting at the bar, a guy came up and started talking to me. Definitely nothing to worry about yet. It was a bar and he definitely seemed like he was just trying to pick me up. We had a light conversation. He offered to buy me a drink and I accepted. He called the bartender and I ordered. We talked a little more and exchanged numbers. I told him I was waiting for a friend and he asked if she was as pretty and unique as me. Being an alternative girl, guys never really know how to compliment. I laughed and said, no, he is definitely prettier, and with almost perfect timing, my friend messaged me that he was there but couldn't see me. I told him I was sitting at the end corner of the bar and he came and found me. I gave my friend a hug and introduced the two. The guy started to act a little strange now, saying that he didn't want to interrupt our night and being kind of standoffish. He said he had to go and just up and left. I wondered if maybe he was intimidated by my friend because he's like 6'4" but like lanky, so probably not. I had his number and thought I'd message him tomorrow. I had a nice night with my friend and we had some drinks and then went and got food and more drinks. It was about 11-ish and time to say goodbye, so we walked to the train station and because we live in different areas, took different trains. His train showed up before mine and we said our final goodbye as I waved him off. I had another 10 or so minutes before my train, so I just took out my phone and browsed my socials. This is when I got that feeling of being watched. I looked around and see no one looking at me, and since I was in the city, even though it was kinda late, people were still about. So I went back to browsing and had someone sit down next to me. "Thought it was you," the voice said. I looked up and was surprised to see the guy from the bar. I asked if he was also heading home. He said he was and that he needed to feed his cat. As a cat person, I asked more about that and he showed me pictures. He asked if I wanted to come home with him and see her. I told him maybe some other time and he was pretty insistent, but I still refused. My train was coming and I stood to go wait for it. As I was about to turn and say goodbye, he was standing as well. He said he was taking the same train and at this point I was a little suspicious, but it was a main train, so we got on and I sat down and again he sat next to me. I had to get off in 2 stops, then get on another train for another 2 stops, and he also got off at the same stop and on the same train again. The whole time having normal conversation with me. Obviously, I was freaking out a little, so I messaged my housemate and asked him to wait for me at the station. Luckily, him and his missus were still up. He asked why, and I told him to just do it. When we got off at the station, that was only a short walk to my apartment, I said it was a funny coincidence that he also lived around here. He turned to me and said, "No, you're taking me to your place." I apologized if he had misunderstood me, but I never said anything like that. He said that he was already all this way and that I should just let him come over. Like he was ordering me around. It all just felt gross. At this point, I was in full panic mode. There weren't that many people at this stop, as we are in a suburban neighborhood now. This is probably when I looked noticeably panicked, and my housemate saw this and came out of the car. He's 29 and quite a big guy. He came over and asked if there was a problem. The guy said that he was my date and that I was taking him home. I said that was a lie, and my housemate just walked me to the car and mean-mugged the guy the whole time. Sitting in the car, I got a text. It said, "I'll see you again." I'd totally forgotten I gave him my number. I looked up to see him still standing at the station. We locked eyes and he smiled and waved. It wasn't a creepy smile. It looked nice and genuine and and I think that's what made it creepier. I purposely avoid that bar from now on. I met him in high school because we rode the same school bus. I was a freshman who was new to the area and he was a sophomore. He would get off the bus 3 stops before me. After a month, he started sitting in the seat behind my usual spot on the bus and then would get off at the same stop as me. The first time it happened, I think it was weird, but figured maybe he had a friend in the area. I never made contact with him and just walked home. It happened several times after, and I had an eerie feeling he might be following me, and that's why he sat behind me on the bus so I wouldn't suspect him. But I soothed my worries again with the thought. He might have a friend that lives down here, and maybe he didn't want to walk as far, so he got off at my stop. I did turn back once to see where he went after he got off the bus, but never saw him. It was like he disappeared. He started showing direct interest in me in the hallways. Somehow, without us being in any classes together, he learned my name. He would say hi to me by name in the hallways as I'd pass by, and he would always wave. I never stopped walking to have a chat with him, and I found the interaction rather odd, because he always did this when he saw me. Even if he already said hi to me that day, it was always the same words. Hello, say my name, and then wave. I typically wave back to be polite during these brief encounters, but after a few weeks of that happening, it seemed really weird. I asked my brother about him as they were in the same grade, and he told me his real name, but he said he goes by the name Goggles, because he wore these thick Coke bottle glasses. He also confirmed my thought that Goggles had some strange fascination with me. I figured he had a crush on me, but I wasn't attracted to him at all. I really wanted nothing to do with him, but did maintain my politeness of waving hi to him in the mornings. Then something really creepy happened. One day he showed up to my house, on a weekend, unexpectedly. He rang the bell and my mom let him in when he asked for me. She yelled for me that I had a friend stop by, and when I saw him at the bottom of the staircase in the entryway of my house, I freaked out inside. I greeted him and asked him what he was doing here. He said he wanted to hang out, and then he proceeded to ask my mom if we could hang out at his house. I was still upstairs and absolutely baffled by how he was actually inside my house that I didn't have time to think of an excuse of what I was busy doing. My mom, who was extremely excited I had a friend since I was new to the area, quickly gave him permission to hang out with me and usher me to come downstairs. I ended up leaving with him. I thought, if anything, I'd have a chance to clear the air with him and see what his deal was. We started to walk, and I asked him how he knew where I lived. He said from riding the bus he saw me coming home one day. He said I always seemed really nice, so he wanted to get to know me. I talked about how I was new to the area and what I thought of the school. I asked him what he planned for us to do at his house. He said he didn't really have a plan, but he made sure to tell me his parents weren't home. I expressed how I was confused by why he told my mom we were friends when we barely know each other. He said, "Don't you want to be friends?" I didn't know how to answer that truthfully without sounding rude, so I said yeah instead. We got to his parents' house and I felt really awkward but went inside. The place was barren, almost like no one even lived there. No couch, no TV. I asked for a second time what he wanted to do. He didn't come up with an answer, again besides hang out. The truth finally poured out, and I told him I felt unsure about this whole thing and said I didn't understand why he wanted to hang out at his house if there wasn't a plan. I told him I didn't want to hang out that day and that I better go home. I let myself out in a hurry and basically ran home. I never said anything to my mom about that day. I really don't know what his true intentions were. So as the months go by, I don't make eye contact with him on the bus. I do, however, make sure he gets off the bus at his stop and isn't following me home. He even stopped saying hi and waving to me in the hallways for a while. The school year ends. My sophomore year starts and he's saying hi and waving to me again in the hallways every time we pass each other by. Sometimes I wave back and sometimes I pretend not to notice. I feel very annoyed when he does this multiple times in the day, so I go out of my way to find a new route to my next class so he won't see me. My brother gets his license, so we never have to take the bus again. My junior year, Goggles is still waving and saying hi with each sight of me. I'm very fed up at this point and always ignore him and never wave back or say hi. I did see him once in the computer lab prior to my graphic design class starting. I sat down at my assigned computer and he said he found my MySpace and he confessed he was looking at my pictures all night long. I get red in the face and don't know what to say. He tells me we should hang out again and that it was fun the last time we did. A few of my peers from my class overhear this and make comments on what he was doing with my pictures that night. Ew. I avoid him like the plague the remainder of the year. He graduated after my junior year was completed, thankfully. I move about 20 minutes away at the start of senior year and start working at the local movie theater, and that's where he finds me next. He comes in with his mom and I'm at the concession stand and have to wait on them. They make weekly trips to the theater and always get in my line for concessions. We make no small talk during these interactions, but I understand. Why do they always choose my line? He starts to frequent the movies alone and try to talk to me at the concession stand on slow nights. For a while, he was there twice a week. I started calling, telling my coworkers that he's my stalker. Someone tells me they heard a coworker of ours give him detailed information of my typical work schedule. I was mad and stopped being friends with that coworker immediately. She then gives him my cell number out of spite. Meanwhile, every time I see him come to the concession stand, I try to hide in the back room to avoid him. I start to get calls every night from the same number. The caller wouldn't typically leave messages or anything, however, there was one really creepy message of some heavy breathing that was left. I asked my dad to help me block that number. We went to the cell provider and they said I can't block one number. It's either block all numbers or none at all. So I don't do anything. Dad doesn't want to change my cell phone number. So I graduate. Haven't had any interaction with Goggles since I started to hide from him at my job and the random calls became less frequent. Until I went to Wendy's with my friend and I'm wearing a miniskirt and tank top. We get behind the first customer in line who is paying all in change and I realize it's him. I freak out inside and whisper to my friend that it's my stalker and I hope he doesn't notice me. Of course he notices me as soon as he turns around. He checks me out and asks, "Hey, did you go to this high school?" My friend stupidly says, "Yeah, we did." He then asks for me by name and my friend says, "Yeah, that's her." I wanted to smack my friend for saying this to him. He says to me that I look really good and asks if he could sit with us when we get our food. I quickly tell him no. He then goes to find a seat and we order. I want to leave ASAP at this point. My friend wants to eat there and she won't leave with me. So we sit down and Goggles changes chairs to sit at the table right next to ours. I ate quickly and in silence and it was so awkward. He kept asking where I was living now as he saw I no longer lived at my old house. I didn't tell him anything and said he didn't need to know. I see him the next time at the local grocery store. He's retrieving carts from the lot. I had no idea he worked there, but when I saw him, I ran inside as quickly as I could, hoping he wouldn't see me. And you know what? He did. He stopped retrieving carts to follow me from the parking lot into the store. Referred to me as Miss and asked me in 2 different aisles if he could help me find anything. I told him no both times. When I was ready to check out, he opened up his own cashier lane and another worker ushered me over to him. I said to him he didn't need to follow me around the store or open up a lane for me, but he said he wanted to help me and that we should hang out sometime. I told him he needs to leave me alone. I am attending community college and guess who is also there? Goggles. I notice him following me on routes to my class, and he starts waiting outside the art classroom I'm in for me to leave to follow me again. One day, I'm waiting on getting coffee from the vending machine, and he runs up to me and greets me like I'm his long-lost friend. He gives me a tight, long hug in the hallway. I'm mortified, and am standing there with arms flat at my side, not hugging back. He finishes the hug, and I say, "Was that necessary? Don't ever touch me again." I ended up dropping that class to avoid him and file a police report. This is the last time I saw him. I've since moved multiple times and I think he finally got the hint. I don't ever know why he chased me or followed me for so long. Maybe I was just too nice. This happened about a year and a half ago. So there was this parkway that I used to always drive to. It was just a single road that went up a mountain with quite a few pull-offs where you could see these beautiful views. This one specific pull-off is one that I would go to the most. It was a place where you had to go through some trees but would end up on a rock that looked over a huge mountain view. I would go to this when I felt like I needed to breathe and take a break from life. It took me about 20 minutes to drive to that specific spot after entering the park itself. So one day I decided that I needed to just let myself breathe and drove up. All was normal. It was actually a pretty day with the bright skies and puffy clouds around maybe 3 p.m. On the way driving to the spot, I passed quite a few cars. Not many. It was normal to see cars, but not a lot when it's the middle of a weekday. I got to my spot, relaxed for maybe 20 to 30 minutes, then decided that helped, but was time to head down. Pretty sure my boyfriend was about to get off work. So I started heading down, and maybe at about 5 or 10 minutes into it, I see a red car parked on the side of the road with its hazards on. I right away remember seeing that car on the way up, but didn't think anything of it. Maybe they just heard or saw something and needed to check out their car. I, though, did not pull over to check if they needed help. Like I'm a good person and all, but I've heard all the stories. I'm gonna just keep driving. I also know that it's in the middle of the day, but I just honestly think I wouldn't be able to help them even if I wanted to. And this is when it got weird. Right, and I mean right when I passed them, they turned off the hazard lights and got behind me. Still at this moment, no red flags are going off. Maybe they figured out the problem was just waiting for me to pass to get back on the road. The only thing is, at this point, they were really riding my bumper. Like it didn't matter how much I sped up, they were right there with me. At this point, I look at my phone to realize my boyfriend has texted me. Obviously, I'm not going to text and drive. I'm on a swervy mountain and a car that is not letting me be, so I make a plan. I will quickly get off into a pull-off to text him back, and if this car does decide to follow me, I'll get back onto the road and won't stop. I was thinking rational, but was paranoid at the same time. I'm driving at least 60 miles per hour down this road. Speed limit was like 45, and the first pull-off I see, I quickly turn on my blinker and turn really fast into it. Wasn't smart, but didn't know what else to do. But thank God the guy actually didn't turn into the pull-off with me. I take a sigh of relief and concluded that I was overreacting. So I thought. I text my boyfriend back, sit there for another 5 or more minutes just to make sure the car would be out of the park by now before continuing back down. So I'm literally about to be at the end of the park before I have to turn onto the highway to head back to my town. I see the now leaving sign, but that's not the only thing I see. Right on the side of the road, the same car was parked. At this point, I now knew something for a fact wasn't right, and again, right when I passed them, they pulled out right behind me. Oh no. I raced my car as fast as I could to the highway, barely stopped to make sure cars weren't coming. I just pulled my car out as fast as I could, left onto that highway. I looked to see in my rearview mirror, and they did the same thing. They're still right behind me. It wasn't even a question anymore of are they following me. It's how do I lose them to stop following me. So I did what any sane person would do. I sped like an insane person. They were behind me for probably another 3 more minutes before I started going into and out of cars to lose him. It worked, and at this point I think they slowed down because they realized they couldn't have done anything anymore with how many people were around now. I knew I felt bad for the way I was driving around, but I was too scared to think what to do otherwise. Look, this could have been just someone trying to play around and scare me, but all I need to say is it worked. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, goggles wanna fondle.